Found my fiancé partying in Spain with friends after he disappeared 2 weeks before our wedding. I, 24F, was supposed to get married 3 days ago, but I had to cancel everything because Marcus, my fiancé, 24M, did something super messed up. He and I have been together for the past 5 years since we were in college, and earlier this year, we got engaged. We were very happy together, and I had been super excited about the wedding. Then, 2 weeks ago, things changed all of a sudden. One morning, after I woke up, I just found him gone. No note, no text, no explanation. Of course, I started panicking. I tried to call him. I tried to text him. But he didn't respond. And what's worse was that his phone was switched off for an entire day. I asked his family about it, but even they had no clue. When I reached out to his friends, they didn't respond to me either. At first, I thought he had gotten cold feet and made a run for it. But as time passed, I started to think that maybe something bad had happened. I was almost going to report him missing when really late at night, around 4 a.m. I finally found out what had actually happened and why he was missing. And the worst part? He didn't even feel the need to inform me himself. I found out when one of his friends posted a bunch of pictures on Instagram. They were partying at some bar. Lucky for me, they had tagged the bar in their stories and posts. When I looked up the place online, I realized it was in Spain. I was furious. He was out getting drunk with his friends while I was losing my mind back home, worrying like crazy. I instantly texted him, telling him I'd figured out where he was. I also told him that if he didn't come back on the next flight, the wedding would be off. I sent him a really long message about how disappointed I was in his behavior. He had literally ghosted me for an entire day and hadn't even had the basic courtesy to tell his fiancée before taking off on some random trip with his friends. I was mad, and I didn't bother to hide it in my messages. But even after I saw the post and sent him those texts, he didn't respond right away. I had to wait until the next evening for him to finally call me back. When he did, it turned out to be one of the most disappointing phone calls I've ever had in my life. Instead of apologizing and trying to fix the situation, he made everything much worse. When I picked up the call, I was already feeling cold and distant toward him. He picked up on that tone almost immediately. But instead of acknowledging what he'd done, he got defensive right away. He told me his college friends had been planning the trip for a long time and that they'd only informed him after they'd paid for everything. He knew that we had discussed bachelor and bachelorette parties before, and he knew I wasn't a fan of the idea. That's why we both agreed not to have one. But a few days before the trip, his friends reached out to him and said everything had already been arranged and paid for. So, according to him, he had to go because it would have been rude and inconsiderate to refuse after they'd made the effort. I was stunned. He'd known about the trip for 3 days before leaving, and yet he hadn't told me. That made me even angrier. So, of course, I started yelling at him over the phone about his behavior. Even then, he didn't seem to feel sorry. He just kept getting more defensive. He told me that he knew I wouldn't have agreed to the trip if he'd asked, which was why he had to hide it from me. And apparently, though I'm still not sure if it's true or not, he tried to contact me after he landed in Spain, but his phone was acting up. After that, he forgot to reach out because he was too busy hanging out with his friends. Seriously? It was mind-blowing to me that something as important as letting me know his whereabouts could just slip his mind. Especially when he was doing something so wrong. For some reason, though, he just couldn't understand why I was upset. He kept defending himself, saying that he'd only ever been with me since he was 18 and that he needed to have life experiences before settling down. Whatever that means. At that point, I was done. I told him I still stood by everything I'd said. I told him that I wanted him back on the next flight home and that if he didn't come back, we were done. There would be no wedding. And do you know what he said? He told me he wasn't coming back on the next flight. His friends had planned a 2-week trip, and they were going to see it through. He told me I just needed to deal with it. Before I could even respond, he disconnected the call. I tried calling him back, but he wouldn't answer. I was so upset. I kept texting him for the next 2 days. But eventually, I gave up. It was clear that partying with his friends was more important to him than his fiancée, and even his wedding. I told his family everything, and from what I know, they tried to contact him and convince him to come back. But he wouldn't respond to them either. So, eventually, I did what I had to do. I called off the wedding. I didn't make any formal announcements about calling off the wedding. I simply reached out to everyone who had been invited and sent them a message saying that the wedding had been cancelled. I also made sure to tell them not to talk to Marcus about it and explained why the wedding wasn't happening. I spoke to the vendors, took care of the cancellation charges, and figured I'd get the money back from Marcus later. But honestly, at that point, teaching him a lesson felt more important. That's where things started to spiral even more. My parents weren't happy about what I was doing. They wanted me to wait for Marcus to come back and at least have a discussion with him before making any drastic decisions. But I wasn't willing to do that. I was too angry, too hurt. For the record, we've never had problems like this before. Of course, like any other couple, we've had petty fights from time to time. But those were always minor arguments that we could solve easily. That's why we've been together for almost 6 years. I had never once felt like I was too young to be getting married or that I wasn't sure about him. I thought he felt the same way. But when he said he wanted to have life experiences before settling down with me, I felt betrayed. It was as if the person I'd been planning to spend my life with wasn't the same person anymore. A couple of days later, he finally returned from his trip. He came straight home, but I refused to let him in. He arrived in the evening, knocking on the door, but I didn't even open it. I just told him from inside the house to go away. We argued through the door for a bit, and he told me that I couldn't do this to him. He said we were supposed to get married in a few days, and that I needed to talk to him and sort things out instead of acting immature. That's when I opened the door. I wanted to see his face when I broke the news to him. I told him that the wedding was off. And he had no right to act shocked about it because I told him very clearly that this was exactly what I was going to do if he didn't come back home soon. All I had done was live up to my word. He looked stunned. His expression went from shock to sadness in seconds, and before I knew it, he was crying. He kept saying over and over again that I couldn't just throw away 6 years of our relationship over this. He apologized repeatedly, saying he was willing to do whatever it took to fix things. He begged me to marry him, even if we didn't have the big celebration we'd planned. It took everything in me to hold firm, but I knew I couldn't forgive him. I shut the door on him. He stayed outside, crying and begging me to talk to him for about 20 minutes before he finally gave up and left. From what I've heard, he's staying with his parents now. They've been keeping in touch with me and told me he's completely shattered. Apparently, he's refusing to eat or even leave his room. They say all he asks about is whether I've agreed to meet him yet. They don't say it outright, but I can tell from their tone that they, and even my own parents, think I was too hasty and too harsh. And I can't lie. I've started wondering that myself. After everything went down, I reached out to everyone who had been invited to the wedding. Apart from Marcus's group of college friends, everyone on the guest list received a message from me explaining that the wedding was off and why. Most people just sent back short responses to console me, telling me they were sorry and that they hoped I was okay. But a few of them, who were closer to Marcus, actually forwarded my message to him while he was still on that trip. Apparently, when Marcus saw the messages, he didn't take them seriously. He thought everyone was bluffing and trying to scare him into coming back. But now? He regrets everything. He's been messaging all of our mutual friends and family members, apologizing profusely, trying to get through to me. Since I've blocked him, he can't contact me directly. So instead, he's been asking everyone else to pass his messages along. And the messages they've forwarded to me? They're all the same, him apologizing, telling me how much I mean to him, how he made a huge mistake and that he'll do anything to make things right. He's even said that he still wants to get married, and he doesn't care if we don't have the big wedding we'd planned. He just wants to be with me. Honestly, reading those messages has been exhausting. I know I did what I had to do. I told him clearly that if he didn't come back when I asked, the wedding would be off. I don't think my demands were unreasonable at all, especially considering we were supposed to be getting married. But despite all that, my parents keep telling me I overreacted. They've said repeatedly that calling off the wedding over something like this was petty and immature. At first, I didn't care what they thought. I was confident that I'd made the right decision. But after hearing it over and over again, from my parents, his parents, and even some mutual friends, I've started to question myself. Am I really the bad guy here? A couple of days ago, things reached a boiling point. It was supposed to be my wedding day, and I woke up feeling completely shattered. I spent the entire day thinking about what should have been. Instead of walking down the aisle, surrounded by our friends and family, I was alone in my room, drowning in messages from people telling me how sorry they were that things had ended this way. Some people were still forwarding apologies from Marcus. Others just sent random texts to check in, saying things like "Hi, hope you're okay," without offering anything meaningful to the conversation. I felt empty. My world had been turned upside down in the span of 2 weeks. Everything I'd been looking forward to, everything I'd been planning for months, was gone. That evening, I decided to talk to my parents. I thought it would help clear my head. But when I sat down with them, I could tell right away that they were upset. Not just upset for me, but upset with me. They weren't there to comfort me. Instead, they told me they didn't think I'd done the right thing. Hearing that? It broke me. I'd been having doubts already. But hearing my own parents say they didn't support my decision made my world crash down around me. Since then, I've been in a strange mental state. I keep second-guessing myself. I haven't even had the energy to talk to my friends about what I'm going through. And that's how I ended up here. I don't know who else to turn to. I need completely unbiased opinions because right now, I'm just lost. So, Ida for canceling my wedding after my fiancé went on an impromptu bachelor trip 2 weeks before our wedding and refused to come back when I asked him to? Hi everyone. Thank you to everyone who commented on my post. It has been 4 days since I shared my story, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything that happened. I spoke to my parents again, and I told them how hurt I was by what they'd said. I explained that it wasn't fair for them to make me feel like I was the bad guy. After all, I was the one who'd been left behind, panicking, while my fiancé ran off to another country without even telling me. Honestly, after reading all the comments on my post, I felt validated. So many people were outraged on my behalf, and it made me feel like I hadn't done anything wrong. But even after hearing me out, my parents still didn't seem to understand. They told me that they were just being honest with me and sharing how they felt. And that's the problem. I don't understand how they could feel that I'm in the wrong here. Marcus literally took off on a trip with his friends without informing me. Then, when I asked him to come back, he refused. I think that's a huge deal, and I warned him about the consequences. He knew that if he didn't come back, I would cancel the wedding. I don't think my demands were unreasonable at all. Especially considering that we were supposed to be getting married in a matter of days. So how am I the one in the wrong? It's baffling to me that my parents, and other people, don't seem to see it that way. They keep saying they understand why I'm upset, but they also think it was a petty reason to cancel a wedding and end a 6-year relationship. It wasn't easy for me to do it. Calling off the wedding was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And the least I expected was for my parents to support me. But it seems like they're not willing to do that. I've tried talking to them about this a couple of times since then. And every time, it ends with us fighting. So now, I've decided I'm done trying. If they don't get it, then there's nothing more I can do. They can keep believing I'm the bad guy if they want to. But I know what I did, and I know why I had to do it. Life has already become difficult enough for me in the past couple of weeks. I don't need them making it harder. Apart from my parents, I've also had to deal with a lot of mutual friends. Most of them have been forwarding messages from Marcus, telling me how sorry he is and how desperate he is to make things right. At first, I tried to explain politely that I didn't want to hear from him. I told them that I was already going through a difficult time, and their constant messages were only making things harder for me emotionally. I asked them to stop forwarding his apologies. Most of them understood. They apologized for bothering me and promised to respect my wishes. But a few of them? They started attacking me. These were people I considered friends. People I've known for years. And they started calling me self-centered, saying that I was destroying my relationship over an ego trip. It hurt more than I expected. If these people who've known me for years, think I'm the bad guy, then maybe I am. But at the same time, I know I did what I had to do. When they started guilt-tripping me, I didn't bother arguing. I'd already learned my lesson from trying to talk to my parents. So I just blocked them and decided to move on. I know that right now, a lot of people think Marcus is the victim. They see him as someone who made a mistake and deserves a second chance. Meanwhile, they think I'm a heartless control freak who dumped him just because he didn't come back from a trip when I asked him to. It's shocking to me. I'd shared all the details in my message to everyone when I called off the wedding. And yet, people still seem to have sympathy for him. I guess I'll never fully understand it. But honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. The relationship is over. The wedding is cancelled. And I'm not marrying him. I've already started making peace with that fact. And it's time for everyone else to do the same. It's been 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents. After our last fight, they haven't tried to contact me again. Honestly, I don't mind. If they still don't see my point, then there's nothing more I can do to change their minds. Most of the people who were passing along Marcus's messages have either stopped or have been blocked by me. So, things have been quiet for the past few days. But then, a couple of days ago, something completely unexpected happened. Marcus's friends, the ones he went on that trip with, reached out to me. I had blocked all of them when I blocked Marcus. After what they'd done, I wanted nothing to do with them. And for a while, they didn't try to contact me, which made sense. They probably didn't have the guts. But suddenly, out of the blue, I got an email from them. In the email, they apologized for everything. They said they realized they'd messed up and shouldn't have encouraged Marcus to go on the trip. Instead, they should have given him better advice. They admitted that they'd made things worse by egging him on to ignore my messages and stay in Spain. I don't know if their apology was sincere or if they were just digging an even deeper hole for Marcus. But one thing stood out to me: they confirmed that they'd encouraged him to stay on that trip and not contact me. Reading that made me feel even worse. It's pathetic that Marcus, who's supposed to be a grown man, allowed himself to be influenced by his friends like that. He knew what he was doing. He knew how serious the situation was. And yet, he still chose to ruin everything we had for a stupid vacation. He's not a teenager who can claim he gave in to peer pressure. He's an adult. He made his choices, and now he has to face the consequences. After reading part of the email, I couldn't stomach any more of it. I deleted it before finishing. I didn't care about their apology or whatever excuses they had. The fact is, they weren't real friends. If they had been, they would have cared about his relationship and told him to do the right thing. But they didn't. I don't need to hear anything else from them. It's too late now. I've already started trying to move on with my life. I've accepted that the relationship is over. There's no going back. The only thing left to do was figure out when Marcus could come by and collect his things. That felt like the final step, the closure I needed. For a while, I wasn't ready to deal with it. But last night, I finally contacted his parents and told them he could come by any time this week in the evening to get his stuff. They tried to get me to talk to him while we were on the phone, but I hung up before that could happen. Like I said, telling him to come by and take his things was the last step I needed to take. Now that I've done it, I don't think I need to talk to him anymore. I'm done. Today, Marcus finally came over to collect his things. I knew it was going to be difficult, so I'd already mentally prepared myself for the worst. But, surprisingly, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I had contacted his parents almost 10 days ago to let them know he could come by any evening that week to get his stuff. But, of course, more than a week passed before he actually showed up. In the meantime, his friends, those same college friends, probably realized I hadn't responded to their email, so they tried to text me from a burner phone. Their texts were straight to the point this time. They skipped all the nonsense from before and just begged me to speak to Marcus. They said he really missed me and was willing to do whatever it took to fix things. I ignored them. When they kept calling me from different numbers, I blocked them again. After a couple of days, they finally stopped trying. For the past 5 days, things had been quiet. Then, last evening, Marcus's parents called me. They told me he would be coming over today to collect his belongings. Surprisingly, they even apologized for everything that had happened. They told me they wished things had worked out differently, but this was how it was, and we all had to accept it. Hearing that was shocking. I guess Marcus finally realized he wasn't going to win me back. Maybe he'd come to terms with the fact that it was over. When he showed up, he brought his dad with him. I stayed in the guest room while they packed his stuff. I didn't want to see too much of him or talk more than necessary. It took them about an hour and a half to finish. We'd been living together for 4 years, so naturally, we had a lot of stuff to sort through. When they were done, his dad stepped outside to give us some privacy. I had asked for it. I didn't really have a plan for what to say to Marcus. I just wanted to say goodbye and get that final closure. It was awkward. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't been sleeping well. He started crying almost immediately. Through tears, he apologized again and told me he wished he'd been a better partner. He said he regretted everything and hated that it had to end this way. Seeing him cry made me tear up, too. I hadn't expected that. We stood there in silence for a moment, both of us holding back tears. Eventually, we hugged. We wished each other the best for the future, and then he left. After he was gone, I sat down on the couch and cried for a good hour. But you know what? I needed that. I needed to see him one last time, to say goodbye, and to end things on a note that wasn't as bitter as our last conversation. It's not a good note to end on. But it's not as terrible as I thought it would be. I wouldn't say I'm happy. But at least I'm content. I finally have the closure I needed. It's been almost a year since I was supposed to get married. Looking back, I think I made the right decision by calling it off. In the beginning, things were really tough. I wasn't on speaking terms with my parents, and of course, the person I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with was no longer part of my world. My mental health took a huge hit. But with the help of a few good friends, I slowly started getting back on my feet. I began going to the gym regularly. I balanced work with a social life, something I hadn't done in a long time. And a few months after the breakup, I decided to start therapy. Since then, I've made a lot of progress. I wouldn't say I'm completely healed, but I'm definitely dealing with things a lot better now. My parents and I still haven't spoken. In fact, they've blocked me on everything. I guess their pride won't let them admit that I made the right choice for myself. At this point, I don't care anymore. As for Marcus, I hadn't spoken to him since the day he came to collect his things. I kept him blocked on all platforms. But a few weeks ago, something unexpected happened. We ran into each other at a restaurant. It was awkward, to say the least. He was out with his coworkers, and I was there with a group of friends. The moment he saw me, I could tell he was surprised. I was considering leaving to avoid the situation, but before I could make a decision, he walked up to my table. He greeted me politely. I greeted him back. We kept it civil, exchanged some pleasantries, and that was it. Honestly, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And that's why I'm writing this update now. Seeing Marcus again reminded me of how far I've come since last year. Around this time last year, I was completely broken. I couldn't imagine a life without him. But now? I'm doing okay. I've accepted that the relationship is over, and I'm moving forward with my life. It's not perfect. I still have my moments of sadness and regret. But for the most part, I'm at peace with my decision. I've realized that sometimes, letting go is the best thing you can do for yourself. Even though things are better now, I still think back to everything that happened and wonder how it all went so wrong. I've had plenty of time to reflect on it, and honestly, I don't think Marcus is a terrible person. He made some really poor choices, but I don't think he ever intended to hurt me the way he did. The problem was that he didn't realize how serious his actions were, or he just didn't care enough to think about the consequences. When I look back, I don't regret ending things with him. I gave him a chance to fix things, and he chose to stay on that trip. He made his decision, and I made mine. What I do regret, though, is how much time I spent questioning myself afterward. For months, I felt guilty. I wondered if I had overreacted or if I should have handled things differently. I spent way too much time second-guessing myself when, deep down, I knew I did the right thing. Now, I'm focused on moving forward. I've started prioritizing my own happiness and well-being, which is something I wasn't doing before. I've also learned a lot about boundaries. I've realized that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even if other people don't agree with you. At the end of the day, no one else has to live with your decisions. You do. And while I'm sad that things ended the way they did, I'm also proud of myself for walking away from a situation that no longer felt right. I know I made the right call. Life doesn't always go the way you plan. Sometimes, things fall apart. And sometimes, that's exactly what you need to finally move forward.